Good morning and welcome to Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast, number 395, recorded live, Wednesday, June 27th, 2018. As you can tell by the voice, this is Shane instead of Todd, right? It doesn't sound like Ray Romano, so you know this is going to be a good show. And to make sure that the show is really good, I've brought a little help today. Help, introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Jonathan. Do I need my last name? Jonathan Mast?
I don't know. I mean, it's only like the 10th time you've been on the show, so I think you'd know how to do this by now.
It's been a while, but thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to it. Talk about stuff. Talk about technology and cloud and all these things and all the things that have changed since the last time I was here years
the
ago.
internet doesn't change very fast. I can't imagine that much has changed since, a year ago when you were last on.
I think it's been longer than that.
Yeah, I meant to look it up earlier, and I ran out of time.
I think it's been a couple of years. But yeah, it's been a while.
Right,
and the internet's pretty much the same. It's still just tubes.
Just tubes. It's kind of a fad. My dad keeps telling me it's gonna go out of style before too long.
Sure. Yep.
What doesn't go out of style though is because Todd's not here. I've got to do all the fanciness, and so part of that fanciness is make sure we give a shout out to our favorite sponsor. That is our friends at SysKit who make the SharePoint doc kit, right? SP doc kit. Wonderful little tool that we've been using since back in our SharePoint 911 days, to take and document your SharePoint farms and all that. So check those guys out. If you haven't already, we're big fans and we like it. And this week we don't have to listen to Todd ramble about it, so I won't ramble either. All right. Speaking of Todd, there's a note in the things that he wrote that says, talk about how much we miss Todd. We don't. What we do miss, though, is the chat room. So apparently Slack is having an outage, right? This is like breaking news. Slack is broken, and so no one can get in other than Mark Chrisman with his weird avatar with his hair coming out of the top of his shirt. It's very weird. But so not having a chat room, you're going to have to keep me honest, Jonathan. You're going to have to keep me entertained because usually the chat room does that.
I can get into the chat room and get the messages, but it does not refresh automatically. I have to manually hit the function F5 button.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing what
Workarounds.
it is, Slack knew that we've got a thing to talk about Microsoft Teams today in the notes. And so Slack is like, yeah, I'm going to show those guys. I'm going to take their channel down and half the internet with me. Because, back in your last job, right, Slack was kind of a key pivot point for running the business. And I'd probably be really upset right now if you were still working there and Slack was down.
We would have to fall back to using email and telephones and all of the things the cavemen invented.
Carrier pigeons. Were you guys big fans of carrier pigeons?
Sure. I still use those. There's nothing more reliable than a message by bird. Slack just told me my computer was offline.
Interesting, since we're talking across the internet.
Definitely not correct.
So either way, go ahead.
I said Mark asked if I was a SharePoint 911/racker. That's true. I was a racker up until March.
Nice, yeah, right.
Accurate.
So we worked together for 6, 7 years.
Almost 7 years, yeah.
Yeah, if I hadn't ran out of rack space, it would have been much longer. But
yeah. That's weird. Yep, it was time we spent. It was well spent together. Lots of good memories. Both with the small SharePoint 911 group and then the Rackspace group. But I think there was somebody said at some point you always have your last day in both of those things, and we both did. It was fun though.
It was. Well, so you had your last day there finally. Where did you give it up to go to? What did you go do?
The mothership. I work at Microsoft.
Oh, we got another softie. I love it.
Yeah, the blue badge.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're a fancy blue badge.
It is official. Hang on, I'm going to get it. Maybe.
And while he finishes it, it's just one of those things when Jonathan was kind of thinking about this move. It was one of those deals where you're like, there's a picture of it. This is why you guys should watch the video. You see my pretty face. You see Jonathan's badge. Maybe you could steal his identity from it. Who knows?
Probably not.
But, Jonathan moving to Microsoft, I think was a great fit, right? Because you've always been a super technologist nerd, and I think they're kind of letting you, utilize some of those skills that you've always had. I don't know. I mean, what are you doing exactly?
So I am an Azure technical specialist. What does that mean? I think I delete a lot of email
Nice.
I talk about Azure to whoever listens, or sometimes to whoever won't listen. I focus on application development and infrastructure on Azure, so what we call our intelligent cloud, which incorporates most of the Azure platform, but app dev, VM type stuff, IS stuff, and then data, AI, and IoT falls under that as well. So we split our field technical people into data and AI, so things like Power BI, data lake, ETL types of stuff, IoT lives there. And then all of our machine learning and cognitive services live over in data and AI, and we have separate technical folks for that. And then app dev and infrastructure is where I spend the majority of my time, and these days that looks and sounds a lot like containers, and Kubernetes is becoming really popular. Service Fabric I spend a lot of time on as well. Um, so that's kind of what I focus my time on, and that means spending a lot of time talking with customers about maybe the project that they're working on, or project maybe they think they need to work on, or just kind of doing 100 level educational things around the cloud, around Azure, around these movements, not just specifically about Azure, but just around sort of what that motion looks like. So it's a little different. At Rackspace, I spent a lot of time doing product engineering and development, about 4 years, kind of building the managed services Azure offering there. And then, of course, before that, there was a lot of SharePoint and collaborative and .NET sort of client services delivery things. And this is more kind of like more work geared towards what I did earlier on in my career, really focused on outreach and customer, get a lot of freedom on where I spend my time, which is awesome. We just go where the customers are, get to work on a lot of hard problems, and spend a lot of time gabbing,
Yep.
as a flibbertigibbet.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because one of the things we've talked about on the show several different times is this idea that a lot of us SharePointy people are starting to move out, or not move out, but supplement our skills. And so if we think back to when I brought you on at SharePoint 911 all those years ago, really, I mean, this is probably narrower the focus than you'd want, but in my head, Jonathan was another SharePoint developer, right? You came in, you could write SharePoint.net, you could do that type of stuff. And so then now we fast forward 6, 7 years later, and you still have those skills, all those .NET things, but you've evolved with the ecosystem. You kind of reached out, you played with some Azure stuff, and you're like, I kind of like this Azure thing, and lo and behold, your career is kind of completely transformed
Well,
to sound like what it was way back in the beginning. But pretty cool.
there was this boom, right, with SharePoint that we all sort of were pulled into, or like if we go back to the year maybe 2006, 2007, like SharePoint 2007 is where SharePoint really started to see a lot of penetration in the market, and gain a lot of the collaboration and knowledge management mind share. So I've always had sort of a developer background, like a software engineer background. That's the way I was trained, I guess you could say, from an academic perspective, and that's sort of where my brain goes. So it was an interesting niche at the time to be sort of the developer that always was attacked unfairly by the IT pros in terms of their farms, and then those things being destroyed. But also, it was a good business for a long time. But like so many other folks, we had to evolve, right? Like SharePoint, the on-premises story became more limited and more focused, and continues to grow in that direction. And so we had to pivot and take the skills that we learned over here, and we started to apply those to other places. And Azure was a natural evolution for that. The C# and the .NET background is an interesting thing, because as Microsoft's evolved over those years, and Satya kind of has taken over and changed the culture externally and outward, and really internally as well, that you learn as you become kind of a part of the machine, is we have embraced open source so much that as a developer focused person or resource, like in the field, I spend less time writing C# code today than I ever have. Like everybody knows .NET runs great on Azure. We spend the majority of our time talking about all the other things that run on Azure, right? So I spend a fair shake now doing, talking about, whatever else, Node, JavaScript, Python, and telling those stories. And then we have Docker, kind of that is part of that mix that as we talked before this, as an administrator, as someone who isn't a developer, they might really care about those things and what that sort of provides to them from a flexibility perspective. So those are the things that we talk about, and that's sort of the way we've circumnavigated the globe of technology over the past 10, 15 years. Can't believe it's been that long.
Well, and Mark in the chat room, the only person that could get in the chat room, and I would like to gang up on you and say that all of the hate that you SharePoint developers got from us SharePoint administrators was justified. So just in case you were wondering, if you thought maybe we made amends or something, no, we as he wrote in the chat room, never forgive, never forget. So he will always hate you. He just wants you to know that.
So we got blamed for the Fab 40, even though we didn't create the Fab 40. And we got blamed for customizations on SharePoint farms, and a lot of that was out of ignorance. And I would argue that a lot of the failures or the trouble that were created from a customization perspective was probably built from a lot of folks that maybe weren't engineers, weren't developers, that started doing SharePoint development, because that's who got involved with SharePoint, right? Like SharePoint was attacked and approached not from an software engineering perspective. It was attached from like almost a hacking perspective. Like, how do we bend this thing to our will rather than integrate with it? And that was a fault of the platform as much as anything, and the education that went around it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because everything was blog posts, right? I mean, one of the clients that I'm working on right now, I'm moving them from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint Online, that basically their SharePoint 2010 farm is a homage to every blog post ever written, right? Every idea for customizing and modifying SharePoint, they tried once in this farm, and it is just a train wreck.
Well, I think I spend a lot of time right now focusing, like, a lot of customizations in SharePoint started as science experiments. Like, I wonder if I can do this. Like, I wonder if I can build a web part that solves this problem. And if you go back to the way, if you want to look at like why Microsoft has rebuilt .NET over the past 3 years, for example, if you go back to the ASP.NET platform upon which SharePoint was built, web parts are very, very destructive potentially to the runtime, to the load, to the resources on the server. Again, not necessarily the fault of the developer, but you had to be a very strong ASP.NET developer. Like, you had to really understand how your tiny little piece of the pie, of this render pie, if you will, impacted the other things around you. And it was really easy to just to do things that were completely safe, even in the sandbox world. When that terrible paradigm showed up, you could still do some things where once you hit the limit, it shut your code down, but bad stuff had already happened. Yeah, and it came late. Like the strong patterns for integrating with SharePoint came late, 2013 on. Like, it took us 10 years to get there, really.
Yeah, they seem to be doing a much better job with that with SharePoint Online, right? So the SharePoint framework and things like that, they're really trying this time around to build something that hopefully scales and hopefully doesn't destroy as many farms along the way as it used to, because it's really just one giant farm in the cloud now.
I mean, look, I've done my modern workplace tour of duty, so I don't spend as much time on that stuff as I once did in terms of the nitty gritty, like the stuff Andrew and some of the others that are really focused on Office 365 developer workloads. That's a whole different group than that I work on in Redmond. But I don't. It's I would say, in terms of the way that ecosystem has evolved, one of the things that we used to struggle with when I was in there is we always seemed a generation behind. Like, from a technical perspective, SharePoint was, because it was on the 3-year product life cycles that we saw from server technologies and stuff. Like, it was slow to this cloud engineering model, and now it's there. So the cool thing about SharePoint now is, as you talk to some of the folks that are doing this work, is it's there. It's kind of on the same roadmap from a technical perspective, from a platform perspective, is the rest of the internet a little bit. Like, you see technologies from a developer that you want to work with. And, you don't look over the cube wall now at the guy or gal next to you that's writing the latest version of .NET code or whatever, and you were 3, 4, 5 versions behind, which is the world that we lived in, 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing also now, though, has been the big change, right? The rise in the citizen developer, the me's of the world who are using our Power Apps and flows to,
Citizen developer, like the
writing
bourgeois.
things. It it's fact. Yeah, you're amused by this, but this is the amount of solutions I can crank out in Power Apps, right? That it's like boom, 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 business problem solved. Let's roll on.
We've said, but yeah, I agree.
It's exciting stuff. I know it's a different mindset, a different world than kind of the software engineering world you came out of. But the awesome thing is it's letting me and some of these business users take our business knowledge and get solutions out the door in hours instead of months.
I think in general, you've seen, and Mark in chat talks about server-side code, and a large-scale team collaboration site is the last worst option immediately behind not meeting a requirement. And one of the things you see across distributed system development, if you look at software engineering in general, or not even software engineering, you just look at system, solution development today, we are moving towards a world of smaller and more discrete components and services to construct a larger thing, right? And so your dependencies that used to be maybe code talking to code within and if you think about that, that's a really tight boundary. That means that there's something in memory on metal that needs to talk to something else in memory on metal. Now our dependencies are transmitted through text over the internet, over a wire, or over a network, right? We're using HTTP, and so there's way more security, there's way less coupling, and there's way more agility. So if we build something really, really small, whether that's like a Power App or a Logic app or an Azure function, and it took us maybe a day or a week to build that thing, that's really good because it's really isolated, it's really focused on whatever problem. But I think the other thing that gets lost there is if we have to throw it away or we have to rebuild it, it doesn't take us a ton of time. It's probably going to take us less time than it took us to write it the first time, whether that's some code on hands on a keyboard in a Visual Studio or some sort of designer or editor in Power Apps or I spend a lot of time on Logic apps right now. Mm-hmm. You have this we're adopting this mentality as engineers, as developers that we've had in the knowledge workers world for a long time, where if I have to trash the artifact that I wrote, or if I have to move on or replace the artifact that I built a week ago, I still have gained all of this knowledge. I recognize that I've still gained all of this knowledge and experience that I think has always been valued, and that we've always taken the benefit of, but we've never really identified that as a part of our delivery. Especially from a software engineering perspective, it was always the code. The thing, we always had this product that we developed, and we had that came out, and it was the most precious thing that we had, that we created. And now we're starting to devalue that a little bit, or value it a little bit less, and we're starting to sort of approach problems more from a progressive, iterative approach nowadays. Even though we've been talking about Agile for 10 years, it's maybe the technology hasn't really been there as much, or we just haven't, the culture of the life of the world, of the life cycle, hasn't quite caught up until now.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, right? As you kind of talk about it and think about the more mature thought processes that software engineers, software architects really kind of put in it as citizen developers, right? We're gonna keep using that word. We don't put into it, right? We're like, hey, I need to do this thing, and as fast as I can do it, I'm gonna do it. And I think one of the problems we are gonna see, it might be months, years from now, but a lot of the solutions that I'm seeing, because they are being written by people without that background that you have, they're making some mistakes that I think that's going to bite them in the butt, right? For one of them, I think is scalability. So, for example, a lot of these solutions I'm talking to people, they're using Excel as their data source, or they're using SharePoint lists as their data source, which works just fine for a quick and dirty solution with 10 lines of data. But if all of a sudden, this thing catches on and now you've got 10,000, or the one customer I talked to had 33,000 items in their SharePoint list, the Power App really kind of started to be like, whoa, what the heck's going on here? This isn't what I was meant to do. And so when they engage with me, right, I know, okay, well, the correct solution is let's get that data out of SharePoint. Let's get it into SQL, do some actual data structured tables and, kind of rejigger the app a little bit to take advantage of the power of SQL. But I think that'll be kind of the next wave. And hopefully that wave or that need doesn't cause all of these apps just to get thrown away. People are like, oh, that doesn't work. No, PowerApps works. You just needed to kind of architect it a little bit on the front end to make some better decisions.
I think that's you talk about we used to talk about like breaking out of like the web part or the share, like how do you break out of the platform and solve the problem? Back in my SharePoint days, like that was the thing. Maybe you did something with an iframe or something where you had just some other software running on another system somewhere completely separate from SharePoint, and they communicated via some connected resource, some web service or some service some API code that you have living in SharePoint in the object model or whatever. I mean, that still exists today. The difference, I think, is 10 years ago we had we had to build our own tools to integrate those things. Like we had to solve that problem, that we had to create our own patterns to solve those problems. Whereas today, if you need to stop housing that data in a SharePoint list because you hit 2 million rows or whatever the number is now, and or your query requirements preclude SharePoint lists from being able to give you the performance that you need, then you have other options that are pretty straightforward. Even before you get to like a SQL database, you have just straight up table storage that can go into the hundreds of millions of records and can be optimized for querying. You have Cosmos DB, similar, that can be geo-distributed and all of these other things. You have SQL Azure. You don't necessarily need a server. You just have a database and you can craft your tables there. But my point is there's a lot of steps in between you having to go and become a database developer for a data storage problem than, to solve this specific or those sorts of specific use cases. And I think that's where it's different. Like tools like PowerApps, if you go back to InfoPath, which is sort of like we can make a funny face about it, but I mean that was definitely the precursor to a tool like PowerApps, right? Like like you're publishing videos today that are saying that we used to do it. Here's a good way of doing this in PowerApps, where we used to have maybe a more stinky way of doing that in InfoPath, or a more limited way of doing that in InfoPath, or whatever. And I think like you're just seeing the interactions and the connectivity between the systems is so much more rich, right, and so much more robust and easy. I think that's the biggest thing. You talk about the citizen developer, the democratization of the technology. That's what Azure and the cloud is doing. Is we're making these feel like we're almost tricking people into engineering systems because it feels more like a configuration exercise than a development exercise.
Yeah, well, and one of the things you point out, and there was a couple of thoughts I had. You don't ever take a breath, so it's really hard to interrupt you mid-thought. But
yep, that's rude anyway. You shouldn't do that.
No, I do it all the time. But so two thoughts there. So one, definitely Azure SQL Database as a Service. That to me might be one of the most powerful pieces of the Azure stack, right? For $10 to $20 a month, man, you can get a database that can kick some butt, has more storage than you'll ever need, and you didn't have to do anything. It is kudos to those guys. I am overwhelmed how impressed I am with Azure Database as a Service. The other piece of that is, I forgot what the other piece. Oh, so the other thing that Microsoft is driving towards, I don't know if you've messed with it at all, probably not, but it is the Common Database Service, or Common Data Service, right? CDS. And so CDS is kind of came down from Mount Dynamics along the way, but going forward, right? That's their vision for where PowerApps data should live, because underneath it's all SQL data, but they've given you this layer between SQL and yourself, and it lets you do things, and you define entities and fields, and you can get in there and kind of mess with all stuff, which I don't want to.
Isn't that?
Go ahead.
Isn't that that we open source that specification? That CDS is like it's on GitHub, isn't it?
CDM is. This is confusing. I had with the product team the other day. Common Data Model.
CDM. I see.
He's on GitHub. And so Common Data Model is all those sets of entities, right? So there's a contact entity with 412 fields.
Yeah.
So you just use that instead of redefining it, right? Because there's an address, there's a phone number, the things that you need to track for these people. So Microsoft is seeing this, right, and they're laying the foundation. There's some licensing challenges still, right? It costs a little bit more bucks to get going with CDS, but I think that that's probably really, a year from now where we'll be talking about you want to be Power Apps, you want to be a citizen developer, hop into CDS, create an entity, and then build your app off of that.
So CDS is like an implementation of the CDM?
Yeah, so CDS is the management layer. CDM is the data, right? It's the data dump that gets you started. Because CDM is just entities, right? An entity is just a table. And then the fields, which are there's the columns. So CDM comes with these pre-populated entities. And so, like, for example, there's an entity called contacts. There's a field called do not call. And then it's set to an option set, which is yes or no, right? They've defined all that in CDM. So we bring that over into CDS, and CDS is where we manage it. We're like, oh, we need a yes, no, and maybe. We can go in and modify that option set, or we can rename it from do not call to do not call before 8 a.m., right? We can work with that, but they give us kind of a starting point, that data set to get going. That's what CDM is. CDS also incorporates a security model. Right now I'm doing a CDS commercial. This was not planned. But CDS allows me to set entity level security and row level security. And what's neat about all that is it's set at the data layer. So and it's not CVS, CD, Mark. D is in dog, Chewy. But so CDS also, everything you said is at the data layer, so the security's there. You can also put in like business rules, so you can say anytime they check the box is Shane awesome? And you check yes, make it require that you have to fill out the field, how awesome is he? And so it gives you that functionality. And then if you use that data set, whether you use that data set in Power Apps or you use that data set with Excel or a third-party business app that you build, those data rules all still follow or are enforced, which is pretty powerful.
This is cool. I didn't know about this. It's funny, like, this is not, we talk about this is probably all, like you said, this came all out of MX, like Dynamics, which is going gangbusters right now as a product, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we get offline, I'll happily give you some more of the backstory. There's some backstory stuff you probably want to know that I probably shouldn't put on here. But yeah, CDS is one of those things. They are investing almost all of their resources from Power Apps, that kind of org structure, investing a lot of their resources in making this go. So it's not there yet. If we're being honest, I probably shouldn't have said that out loud. But it is, I think it's definitely the future.
Well, the challenge that we always had with when we struggled, there was two big problems with InfoPath, right? Well, number one is to do anything of value, you kind of had to have a client.
Yep.
And just we know the complexities of deploying an app, right? Still to this day, we have these problems. The second was accessing the data. Like you had to get your data into a very specific funnel for it to be able to be consumed by InfoPath. And now, I think we have, like I said, I think Power Apps. We like I was just saying, our team that builds that thing learned a whole bunch from our days in the InfoPath world. We kind of have solved those problems. We're uncovering new ones, it sounds like. But it's cool to see that. I know we've talked about Power Apps over the months recently, and it's neat to see things coming out of there that you look at as a power user or as an engineer, and you don't feel scared of what might come.
Yeah, because you can't.
What might come out of that thing.
In theory, you can't get yourself into too much trouble.
I think the concern with InfoPath was always you work yourself into a corner. Like you get yourself into a box, and then like this feature request comes out, or this scale requirement comes out, and you can't. It's unsolvable.
Yep. So switching gears a little bit, right? Because we definitely went a lot longer on that story than I thought. But I want to kind of throw out, so there was some new stuff in the SharePoint Office 365 space. And the thing I liked this week was the new GDPR, sensitive information types. So one of the things they've done to kind of continue on this train of making GDPR management much more manageable in Office 365 security and compliance is they've added a bunch of new information data types. So EU passport number, national ID number, driver's license number, tax ID, social security numbers. So they've added some more field types that you can kind of put into the security and compliance center to make sure you're making your data validations and you're securing the right data and not leaking stuff. So I thought that was pretty big to see that they're still kind of pushing that GDPR. Ever since it went live, I haven't heard much about it. Yay me, because I hate GDPR, but Microsoft's still staying focused there.
Well, I'm a proponent of GDPR.
Boo.
Part of that is probably because I don't have to solve that problem. The other part of it is like it goes these two ways. There's probably a large swath of providers in this world who are not good stewards of your data, of your information. And you like wherever your definition of all those things, like being a good steward sets, like we can probably all agree. So GDPR probably is going to kick a lot of that out. And then there's going to be other people that actually care about that stuff, and they'll either implement their own solution around GDPR to solve these problems, or they'll partner with somebody like us that solves it for you. And I think that's one of those things is you can say what you want about GDPR and the realities of it, but in the end, it's going to be pain for a few years, but in the end, it's going to be a positive outcome. I don't know, my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a popular opinion. I just don't.
I don't think I think it's an unpopular opinion. I see way more people gnashing their teeth and grousing about GDPR than I see people saying this is the right thing for us to do.
Well, because only those of us that are angry about GDPR talk about it, right? The people who are happy with it are just rolling with it. But I was reading an article this morning that said, I guess California is working on passing a data privacy law, right? They're mad somebody's got a law that they don't. But
that's actually
it's true, right?
The reality, yeah.
But I just don't. These people, they're like, we just need to lock down our data, blah blah, right? But they don't understand that things like, I mean, they do, but they don't. That Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these platforms that they love so much, they are fully funded by your data. So if you take away Facebook's ability to use your data, you're not valuable to Facebook. Facebook's going to tell you to go fly a kite, and you're going to be really mad. You'll be like, what do you mean I can't use Facebook anymore? Because you won't share your data, right? And this is the disconnect that a lot of people are having with this whole, I can't believe they use my data. Well, I can't believe you get a multi-billion-dollar platform to use for free.
Like, one of the things the interesting thing about services like Gmail, maybe less Gmail, but Facebook, and to a certain degree Gmail, is even if Facebook offered a thing that said, look, we'll stop harvesting your data, but you just pay us $10 a month to use Facebook, you would still not be valuable to Facebook.
Right.
Like their value out of is not just your specific data. It's the fabric. It's the data fabric that they create between all of their users and the connections that they use and the targeted data and information that they use, which, by the way, we all act like is the worst thing in the world. But I mean, if you looked at it empirically, like if you're going to see ads, wouldn't you just rather see ads about stuff that's valuable to you? Like,
yes.
Why would they just I think there's a lot of bluster right now in the whole privacy and security stuff, and it's very political about all that stuff. So to talk about GDPR and all those things, I think there's parts of it that are just standard. If you tie it back to the original topic or whatever, there's parts to GDPR that are good, that are relevant, and that, like, the right to be forgotten, the right to own my data, like those are things that probably need to exist. Now they're starting to try to get our memes, and that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, we talked about that a couple weeks ago in here. I was really upset with that.
I was there for that. So.
All right, so we'll stop this one, right? I feel like you and I could probably talk for an hour on
Uh-huh.
GDPR. Maybe that's what we'll do tonight at golf. We'll talk about GDPR for our entire golf round. So a couple of quick things I wanted to point out. I did release some more Power Apps videos. It was back to the whole Power Apps repeating tables. So let's get rid of those InfoPath forms and do it in Power Apps. I've got video 1, 2, and 3. It ended up taking me an hour and a half of content to really make this full-featured solution because, well, quite frankly, I wanted it to be better than InfoPath, so I had to kind of add all these little whiz-bang features. So all of that content is now available if you're into the Power Apps stuff. We also have the Community Corner. So SharePoint Saturday Charlotte with our good friend Dan Christian, right? August 11th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Woohoo! We got SharePoint Saturday New England. That'll be October 20th in Burlington, Massachusetts. I think I've been there before. So a couple of those coming up. We feel like I have a few more things to add to the Community Corner, but I never think about them until right now, so it's hard to add them on the fly.
I'm going to be speaking at the Cincinnati Day of Agile,
Oh,
July 27th, I think. But that's developer stuff. You're all welcome to join. I'm encouraged to join. It's a cool little. It's actually it's a cool little all-day conference that they run that costs money, which I like about. But it is posted up in Mason, just north of the city of Cincinnati.
yeah, and I always think that conferences that charge, something always are better, right? The problem I've always had with SharePoint Saturday is if the weather's bad or the weather's too nice, right? No one shows up because they're like, yeah, I'd rather go spend my Saturday, doing this or just sitting on the couch. Whereas, if they get a little skin in the
Saturdays.
game, $100 or something, it tends to get a little more consistency and better attendees. So
Even I think Day of Edge was like $30. I think just even like $50 or $30 is something enough to get somebody to be like, look, I've got something there. So anyway, I'm going to speak in there. I'm going to be talking about DevOps and containers, all things that are relevant to people that aren't developers, by the way. You can talk about containers.
right? Those are those plastic things I put my Christmas lights in, right?
It's what you put your leftovers in and take to lunch.
I don't do leftovers.
I remember. Just go to Waffle House.
So then also keeping up since Jonathan opened up the promotion section with himself, July 22nd through the 24th, I will be back in Seattle doing the Business Application Summit. So I'm currently lobbying to have something to do every hour of the day while I'm there. Not being very successful, but that's what I'm trying for. So that'll be a lot of fun though. Business Application Summit is Power Apps, Excel, Power BI, probably some Flow stuff, trying to help the citizen developer. So be a fun little conference. And then the last thing I have here on the list is SharePoint TechCon Boston, August 26th through 29th. Woo, woo. That will be lots of fun. We always enjoy SP TechCon. I'm doing an all-day Power Apps session. Can you imagine me talking about Power Apps for 8 hours? Yeah! Let's do that thing. So other than that, I guess I just have to say, Jonathan Mast, thank you for hanging out with me today. You were a pleasure. You were a peach. You filled Todd's role of rambling while Shane did something else really well. So good job.
Okay, I'm glad it worked.
So hopefully next time Todd's not around, you'll be around again, and we can we do this again because I always enjoy my Jonathan time.
Always happy to help. I'm looking forward to hanging out this evening as well.
I know we'll golf. So I would say chat room thanks, but really I'll just say Mark, thanks. And then Stacy got in like at the last second. So Stacy, thanks for fighting. Oh, and now Todd's here. Goodness gracious. Now that the show's over, the chat room is filling up. But
Still doesn't work for me. I feel like I'm being unfairly targeted in the chat room, and I have no way to defend myself.
man, I did a good job. I deleted some stuff I wrote mean about you because I knew you couldn't see it. If you'd never seen it, I would have left the mean stuff. But all right. So, hey, I guess I'll say thanks and have a great day.
See you guys.